Yeah, the thing about peanut butter is just get it in there. Just get it in all of the food that you're eating. It's got protein. It's got fats.
What else do you need?
I think those are the two things that it has.
Butterscotch.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 382 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth, and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam, and I'm the webs programmer.
I'm Sam, but I'm the artiste.
And this is a show where we talk about life, business, and working in the games industry. Today's September 22, 2020.
That's good.
Before we get started, we have a warning. There's going to be profanity on this show. So buckle your pants. I hope you're ready. It's going to be great. We also like to we also like to thank our supporters over at moneygrab.bscotch.net. We've got a donation from Mitron, who left us a message as well. Mitron says, "Hey guys, just listen to episode 374. Here's some bucks to get your good selves some Tabasco sauce." I don't quite remember what was in that. That was a couple months ago, but I'm sure we talked about food or something.
We must have.
Mitron says, "If you've not tried it before, a few drops of Tabasco sauce on your peanut butter toast is life-changing stuff." Okay. I personally favor the green version with my peanut butter. Enjoy.
Thanks. So we must have been just talking about peanut butter in that episode, because
peanut butter comes up a lot.
It does. We were literally just last night. And Sam was like, "Fuck, peanut butter is so good."
It's because in Back for Blood, there's this food you could find if you. Yeah, so I ate some peanut butter, and it was like gives you increased melee stamina, and I was like, "Of course,
like real life.
Of course it does."
Food of the god. Peanut butter's the best. If you're allergic,
peanut butter's amazing.
I'm gonna be honest.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah,
it's tough.
Yeah, we probably talked about. We must talk about that episode if we were just talking about peanut butter. But if you treat it as a sauce, because that's what it is, it's a sauce, right? Then yeah, it totally makes sense. You just throw some Tabasco in there or whatever, right? Because you get like Thai food and some other like kind of regional foods that just have like peanut sauce as a staple of the things that go in there. And there's spicy stuff in there. There's like anything you want.
Peanut butter is gamers. You could turn it into anything. You could put it on anything. It's just good. Turn it into a sauce. Yeah. Turn it into a cookie. Whatever.
Yeah.
Dream it up.
I actually do when I cook things these days. Probably like half the time I end up putting peanut butter in it. Like as a sauce. Like you just like literally like throw some soy sauce in there.
Here's a good. If you make some noodles at home, like some ramen. Ramen instant noodles. Throw a little bit of peanut butter in that broth. Throw that shit around. Oh my god,
that's so good. But we are talking not sweet peanut butter. We're talking pure uncut. No, I guess cut a lot.
More pure ground
up
peanuts.
Peanuts. That's the stuff that you want.
Yeah, the thing about peanut butter is just get it in there. Just get it in all of the food that you're eating. It's got protein. It's got fats.
What else?
I think those are the two things that it has. But hey, that's pretty good.
Yeah. What's next? That'll be my business target.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
Be good.
Yeah, more of a GIF person, but I'll take whoever will throw money. I'll become that kind of person. I'll sell out a big peanut.
Or is it
GIF?
It's GIF peanut butter.
Yep.
As opposed to GIF, the graphical interchange format.
Yes. Naturally.
Also, today's episode is sponsored by Favro, which we will talk a bit more about later, but we're big fans. So, stay tuned for that. All right, let's talk about some life stuff. Speaking of food, Sam has a kitchen story. I don't know if this is a food-related kitchen story, but it is a kitchen story.
Well, buckle in, because basically, every so often something happens because you have ADHD, and you just sort of you gaze inward afterwards, and you say, "Did that have to happen?" Like why is this my lot?
But why it had to happen. But you just wish it didn't have to happen.
So yeah, exactly. So this weekend, I was making a smoothie for my wife and stuff in there. Put a lot of things in. So these days she's putting frozen strawberries, frozen pineapple chunks, a lot of frozen things. Okay. So, I get a big spoon, out the yogurt, get that in there, put all the veggies in there, a pile of ice fruit into the blender, right? I go over, set this bad boy, which weighs 700 tons at this point, because it's so full of iced fruit, onto the blender thing, and hit the button, and it goes whoop, making like a clicking noise, like it can't continue. It's just too much stuff in there. And I thought, well, it's never happened before, but I did put a lot of these giant fruit cubes basically into this. So Dinah comes over and she's like, oh, it shouldn't be making that noise. Like, stop it. And so I stopped and I was like, no, I think it's
like
just
a spoon in there or something.
I think it's just fucking locked up because of this fruit, right? So I hit the button again, revs fucking a spoon, blast out the side of the blender like a missile. Punches a hole through the blender and shoots smoothie goo. Damn kitchen. The lid didn't come off. It's a ninja. I mean, these things it's a potent.
Well,
blender.
the lid, they got a good lid. Yeah, the sides, I guess, leave something to be desired.
Yeah. So what had happened was when I was spooning the damn yogurt in, and then for some reason just left the spoon in the fucking blender, and then blew up this blender. Luckily, it's like 10 years old, and we were thinking about getting a new one anyways at some point. So it's like not a.
And nobody died by having a spoon go through their chest, so that's also pretty good.
Spoon-related shrapnel injury, which was a blessing because I
assume the fact that it exploded through the side also absorbed a lot of its kinetic energy, so that there was not.
Yeah, the spoon actually was sort of like just sitting half out of the blender.
Yeah.
And then there was just like blender pieces scattered about. Across. Yeah, so it was pretty spectacular. But I literally just apologized and then I just left. I was like, I'll be back. Just left. I went upstairs, just sort of sat quietly, because you're just like,
you just looked out the window and you were like,
why?
So what you're saying is you thought you were following a smoothie recipe, but really you were following a recipe for disaster.
Oh, yes.
That's what happened. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, next time, this is just one of those lessons. Next time, don't do that.
Yep.
Seemed like a good idea.
That is the thing about ADHD lessons is that the problem is never that
it's never what you did.
What you're supposed to do.
It's correct.
Yeah. It's that it doesn't matter what you're supposed to do or not do. It's if literally anything else is occupying your mind, which is, usually what's happening, then what is supposed to happen is kind of just your body just does stuff. I mean, it is remarkable when like something just doesn't exist in your brain at all. And like, cause you have your morning routine, I
put a spoon in the blender, I was holding on to that spoon.
And like,
I saw it doing
and
there.
you have, exactly. But you have no memory of like then seeing it in there afterwards. So you have no memory of like whether or not you took it out. Right. And so like you have to play this game of did I do the thing?
I can't tell you how many times I've made veggie burgers for lunch, right? And then in my mind I was like, yep, I'll take half of these veggie burgers and put them in the fridge for later, and I'll eat the other half, right? And so that's my plan. Mm-hmm. And then maybe Sampy will come up and I'll be like, oh, do you want these other veggie burgers for your lunch? And she'll be like, oh, sure. So she'll have them. But my brain is still committed to the idea that I put those in the fridge, right? So then later in the day, in the evening, I'll be like, man, I'm hungry. It's dinner time. I'm going to go bust out those veggie burgers that good thing I put those in the fridge. And then I'll open the fridge and I'm like, where the fuck are these? And then I'm like, oh crap. I'm like, oh geez, did I put them in the cabinet again? Because I've done that before, So then I'm just opening up all the cabinets looking for these veggie burgers until finally something clicks. My brain is like trying to reconstruct the events of the day and realize that they have been consumed. And I was there for it the whole time. I was involved in that conversation. It was,
wasn't a secret to you.
It just didn't stick.
You're basically you're just a 24/7 detective with yourself as a super unreliable witness. To try to figure out.
Yeah, this is why I remember reading about how like it was such a big revolutionary idea that in the Air Force they would use checklists for taking off planes, and even in like commercial airlines, because there was a long time where they just relied on pilots to just remember And they're like, yeah, here's this sequence of like 28 switches that if you don't check them all and flip them, the plane will just crash and everybody will die, right? And there was this long time where people were just crashing planes and dying. And the idea of going through a checklist was somehow offensive to people.
Yeah, because it implies you don't know what you're doing, right? Or
But-
that's how we interpret it. Is like,
Yeah. Well, it does. It doesn't necessarily imply it. It explicitly states it.
well, no,
Which
because
is
it's about the
true,
framing,
though,
right?
you know?
Because it's not about whether or not you know what you're doing. It's about whether or not, in the context of the real world and reality, right, that you can keep track of the things that you know and like what you have or haven't done, and keep track of like a complex process.
Yeah. And what kind of ego does it take to say, like, I will literally never make a mistake ever? Right? Like, what kind of bullshit is that? You know? Just take the checklist, go through the checklist. Apparently, this was a big deal in hospitals too, where like,
For surgeries.
doctors were like, I remember shit. And then they just leave a sponge in somebody.
Or operate on the wrong leg.
Yeah. And they'd be like, oh, well, that one was just a fluke, you know, but we're definitely not going to start using checklists or anything.
Totally.
Yeah. So, well, that was good. It was a good story.
Thanks.
You need a blender checklist.
That is one of those, why am I like this kind of stories. Yeah. I mean,
sure there's no utensils left in the blender before you turn it on.
yeah, this is the smoothie equivalent of leaving a sponge in a patient, you know, like you got a spoon out of the drawer and you don't have a mechanism to make sure that that spoon is still accounted for when you turn the blender on.
Yeah, that's true. It's true.
So, let's talk about some industry news.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of interesting things that happened. One is there was a leak of Grand Theft Auto 6. It's a big deal because Grand Theft Auto 5 has been around for, I think, 300 years.
All the time, yeah.
Yep.
Grand Theft Auto was here when the Earth was born, and it will be here when the Earth dies.
And it will somehow persist after that.
So somehow, in spite of the longevity of Grand Theft Auto 5, Rockstar Games has apparently been working on Grand Theft Auto 6 for quite some time.
Almost as long, apparently.
Yeah, well, I guess like 8 years or something.
Yeah.
So one of the things about making a game of that scale, where basically the game is just sort of, it's not a game so much as it's just a city.
It's a simulation of
It's a city that you're a person in.
It's the Matrix.
And you just do go around doing stuff, especially in Grand Theft Auto Online, I guess, where you just kind of are there with other people and you just kind of just go around the city doing whatever you want, which is pretty fascinating, pretty interesting. But to make Grand Theft Auto 6, you know, they've got to one-up Grand Theft Auto 5, which is really hard because
It's a whole
Grand Theft Auto
city.
5 kind of already has everything, right?
Yeah.
So that means that the amount of work required to build Grand Theft Auto 6, to one-up everything, to add even more features, is just astronomical. You know, this is why we've talked about how, like you're probably not
Terraria
going to
2.
see, you're not going to see a Terraria 2 because it somehow has to have more stuff than Terraria 1, which is thousands of things, right?
Well, I mean,
So-
they kept on releasing stuff for that game over like a decade, right? So yeah,
So to make Terraria 2, it would take at least a decade in theory, right?
and they would need to stop releasing things. It's like the idea of like if you're learning something new and you're like learning from somebody who's already been there, they're years ahead of you, right? It's the same thing as like feeling like it like makes this little sense as feeling like you should be able to catch up, right? Because they started 2 years or 5 years or 10 years ahead of you, and unless they just stopped, you know, doing things and progressing, then they're just always 10 years ahead of you or whatever, right? And like that's also where these kinds of long-lived games, but especially a live services game where you're just adding content constantly, there just isn't really a meaningful way to have like, here's version 2 of that, unless the scope of the thing is somehow really small.
Small, but also meaningfully different in a way that it would make sense that it would just have less stuff, right?
Yeah.
So the response to the Grand Theft Auto 6 leak has been really interesting because I would say it's kind of binary. Like you have some people who are fairly understanding that, hey, this is a leak of a game in development. So, you know,
It
whatever.
doesn't mean anything specifically.
Yeah, and even though it's been in development for a long time, it's in development. So, it's a leak, which means it wasn't Rockstar being like, look at our game. It was somebody internally being like, look at this game, right? And so it's not ready to be viewed by the public. Graphically, it's not where they want it to be. It's missing a bunch of features. It's just rough. And some people have been understanding about that, and other people online have been doing a lot of interesting armchair game development commentary.
Oh, that's my favorite.
Just talking about how terrible the game looks and how disappointed they are and how like nothing will ever replace Grand Theft Auto 5. So it's been really interesting to just see kind of like the average gamer take on how games are made,
Yeah. What's the gap, between
It's the
people
peak of
you
the Dunning-Kruger.
Yeah.
The first
Yeah.
one. Yeah.
The deeper you get into an area of expertise, and especially one that starts getting even more collaborative with other areas of expertise, the further away oftentimes the person who consumes the thing you make has any understanding of what the fuck the thing is, like how it becomes a sense of magic at some point. But there's a weird thing that I think a lot of, for some reason, video game players in particular seem to have a sense that because they played a lot of games, oftentimes that they understand in any way together.
Yeah, it's the idea that like, oh, I went on a road trip last summer, so therefore I could probably design and build my own car, right?
Yes.
Like, just because you drove the thing doesn't mean you have any idea.
Right, because like it's got a steering wheel, like what all the parts are, and you can critique a car. You can be like, well, this isn't very fun to drive.
Does it ride well?
It's uncomfortable. It eats too much gas. Like you can come up with all kinds. Like you can critique a thing. And that's the idea of media critique, right? Like media is made for people to consume. It's made for a target audience. And the target audience isn't supposed to be like people who also could create that same media necessarily, right? So it's made for your average gamer. That's what it's for, right? But just like your car is made for your average car driver, it's the same thing. And you can critique it as a consumer because because for you, it's an experiential thing. You experience the outcome, right? But you don't actually get your hands in the guts to make it go necessarily. So you can critique it. And I think there are certain domains where people confuse their ability to like actually meaningfully often critique something with actually understanding like
how it's
what
put
it is
together.
and how it's put together and how it's made, right? And video games are one that just like falls so weirdly deeply into that trap. I don't know why it is with video games that hits that so hard, but
I think what's interesting about games is that making them is some kind of weird combination of like business, politics, software engineering, art, huge like team collaboration, project management. I mean, it's kind of everything. And you also like tell good stories and like have good music. And it's so cross-disciplinary that the idea that somebody could really get what it means to make a game without having done
Made
it
one. Yeah.
is, you just can't really
But even
do
having
that. But I think that's probably
like,
true.
We've been making games for a decade, right? And if I saw like and dug into this leak from GTA 6, right? I don't know how the fuck they're pulling off anything they're pulling off in GTA 5.
Yeah.
Or like, right? Because like
I have no place to comment on anything that I see there.
I
So I'm
would
like,
in a
this is
million
witchcraft.
years, dream of like trying to infer like what the leak
Where they're
implies.
going.
Yeah, because the only thing that it might imply could be like it might give you a hint as to like what comes early and what comes late, right? Because all you're seeing is like some midpoint, right? And so if there's stuff that's not very polished or missing, you can be like, okay, so that stuff I guess comes later, right? It's like you could kind of infer that kind of thing, but also every project is so different.
Yeah, it's one of those things
that doesn't tell you anything about anything except for that one thing, and only barely anything at all there.
Yeah, it appears to be information, but it is not information.
It's just nothing. It's just
nothing.
Yeah. I saw this great web comic that was an analogy to this, where it was like somebody looking at the frame of a house under construction. So it's just the wood. It's like the concrete foundation and then like just the wood frame, right? And looking at it and they're like, well, for starters, like you're going to have wind just coming straight through the walls, and they're like, well, the woodwork looks terrible. And like the flooring, there's nothing, you don't even have any carpet down. Like your roof water's just going to come straight through all the holes in that, you know?
God.
And it's like, well, yeah, like it's the frame, but games can be built in so many different ways, you know, and also you don't see them. It's not like you drive past a video game being built on the road. You can drive past a building. So you have a context of like, oh, they like go together sort of in this framing foundation way. Right. And so you know, if you hired somebody to build a house for you and you went and looked at it and you know, all you saw was the frame, you'd be like, sure, that tracks. Right. But if you see a video game that's half built, you don't have any mental model for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's no
Well,
real life
because there
context for
are
that.
like stereotyped ways that modern houses get put together, right? Like you can actually, like, if you know a lot about that, you can infer a fuckload of stuff when you just like look at a snapshot, current state of a project, right?
Yeah.
But no matter how much you know about actual video game development, you actually it's not stereotyped enough. There aren't things aren't
And
just done
especially-
the same enough anywhere.
Yeah, I do want to say, especially there's a well-known reality in making systems-rich games and especially sim-heavy games, which is that
Yeah.
very frequently do not come together almost at all until the end. They're terrifying to work on because most of the time you're like, okay, we still need this next thing before this is going to be good. We still
And you can't fill out all the content until like all of the mechanisms there, but you can't just have one system by itself and figure out if that's even good because all the systems interact. And so, so if you're building, depending on the kind of game you're making, and then depending on just the studio and the tech and the people involved and the complex, as one of the two of you said about, like, it's a business problem too, right? Because you don't get to just make decisions about, oh, here's what I want to make is already a business decision, right? Here's how I want to make it is this complex business and project problem. And now here's the how. Here's what the progression is going to look like. Because, and especially like if you read any like video game history books, like that kind of dive a little bit into some stories of like how individual games came out and stuff, right? And especially in the AAA space where there's just enormous money involved, right? A lot of what you'll like hear in those stories is like people will work on a project for 6 months with 100 people, and then be like, oh fuck, our lead, like our director of the creative whole thing decided to leave or had to get fired or whatever. And so somebody else came in and they're like, I don't like any of this. And so they scrapped the whole thing. Like this stuff literally happens. And just because like they swapped out somebody at the top, right? Or because they lost funding because like they had to deal with let's say, you know, whatever, Sony, some big name. And then they didn't hit a milestone or that other big company's plans changed and they're like, oh, we don't think we actually care about this anymore because we changed our own business strategy. And so they're like, that's it, you know, that's the end. Or they'll even pull rights and just like say,
And I think that kind of thing is going to happen more with something like a game like Grand Theft Auto 6 because the stakes are high.
yeah, I mean, that's
like
billions of dollars a year game.
Yeah, it's huge, and it has to be better. Like it has to dramatically outpace Grand Theft Auto 5, which means they're going to rework stuff and redo stuff over and over and over again until it does, and it's going to be hard to do.
But they're also under no meaningful time pressure. They may be under like investor pressure and other kinds of business pressures, right? But like,
but that's why
that
in 8 years,
that game makes so much money. They could just like, this is the dream that we have, right? Is to like have a blockbuster hit so that there's no such thing as money or time pressure ever again. And we can just keep making stuff. Just
take however much time you need to make
just doesn't matter.
the craziest thing you can think of.
And that's basically where they are within just in terms of the sheer money involved. But it just depends on like what are the actual driving motivators, you know, on top. But it is weird, like if the only driving motivator you can see, because it's the only one that even exists, is like, oh, the rich people want to get a lot richer. It's really hard to like make the game more, you know, aggressively and faster underneath that banner versus like, oh, we're out of money in a year.
Yeah,
right?
you got 6 months. We need something out.
Yeah.
Much
Yeah. Also, kind of to your point, Sam, about the idea of like of why sim games are so hard to make. I think a good analogy would be like, let's say you wanted to invent poker, like the game poker, right? But there's no such thing as cards. Nobody's ever heard of a deck of cards. There are no decks of cards, right? And if you're like, all right, well, each card that we need to make 52 cards, right? And each card, we need like 10 people and like 4 human years of time. Right. And you actually can't play your first game of poker until you have all 52 cards. Right. if one of the cards is missing, the game is broken, right? You can't play the game at all. And so there's this weird problem with making projects like this where like you're going to see this 3, 4, 5, 8, whatever year investment, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, and you're going to look at it and it's still maybe not good.
Yep.
But that doesn't mean that it's going to be bad. It's just that there's a couple of cards missing before they can actually start playing poker with it to then start tweaking the rules and make it work. Right?
And it just depends so much on the scale, right? Because like with what we're doing with Crashlands 2, like one of our primary motivators is to have the game feel good all the time as much as we can, right? In whatever its current state is. Even though it's incomplete and there's a lot left. So if there's still nuance there, we're trying to pay attention to like, oh, this doesn't feel good, but it's because we don't have this yet, that kind of thing, right? But we try to make it feel like as if like you could just publish it just as long as possible, even though it's like not really, because if we publish it, people would play it, maybe like I only got to play this for an hour, so this isn't worth, whatever, like that kind of stuff. Right. So like we can't, but the reason that we can do that though is because as a very small team, we don't have to try to manage like what happens if we do this work too early, what happens if this, right? Because it just doesn't like, it's still, yes, very expensive, but it's like on such a tiny scale.
It's a different
scale.
That
if we have to do some rework later, we like change how a system works and have to then redo a whole bunch, like whatever, right? The scale is so much smaller that we can basically afford to do that without spending, $100 million or whatever.
I hope so, because we don't really have that kind of money.
We do not have that kind of money.
So it's pretty interesting. I don't know. It's always just kind of funny to see what people think of things that they don't truly understand, and how willing they are to have opinions about things that they don't understand. I don't know. It's pretty goofy.
I think it's I think it kind of goes really in line with my I guess favorite in one way and least favorite in another way, logical fallacy, which is the personal incredulity, right? Which is because I don't understand, it must not be true, right? I think this is the same idea where it's like I think it's like basically just Dunning-Kruger, right? Which is like
it couldn't possibly be that hard, sort of.
Exactly. Like it couldn't possibly be that hard because I don't understand why. Right? That they would be this far into it and that's what it would look like, right? It's this like argument from personal incredulity where you're just like, I don't believe it. And therefore,
is it an ego thing of like, I'm smart and I don't understand X.
I think it's sort of
therefore X is wrong, right? Something can't possibly exist that I don't understand.
Yeah. Right. And that's basically like the entirety of like, like flat earther conspiracies and like similar things like that, right? It's basically that. It's like
somebody's like, I don't get it. So
no.
It's a lie.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. That's what an ego trip.
Yeah.
Get over yourself.
Get over it.
All right. Now, before we go into questions, we'll take a little bit of time to talk about our sponsor, Favro. Okay. So
it's favro.com/bscotch.
Yeah. So Favro is, we've mentioned it on some of our episodes. We actually talked about it before they became a sponsor. We made the switch to Favro, I think it was like a year and a half ago or 2 years ago.
That was a while ago.
It's a work management tool that has a particularly badass feature where you can develop your own workflows and pipelines, and the cards that you use to represent work can live in any number of places at the same time. So you can have something that's, in our case, we one of our cool uses of this system is when it comes to bug tickets that come from our QA team, right? So they can report an issue, and it's there in a workflow that we use for issue tracking as a Favro card, and I can take that bug and I can move it into my sprint, into my own personal workflow. And now it's in both places. So the QA team can see on the issue tracker, they can see that it's in my workflow. I can move it through the pipeline. I can move it into a testing phase. I can do all that stuff. They can see that progression, and everybody can keep track of the states of things in different places at the same time, because stuff can be two things, right? Something can be both a bug and it can also be a piece of work that a programmer needs to do. Those are both true.
In fact,
right?
anything cross-disciplinary, anything that has to go between two people, right?
Yep.
If there's a handoff, like it needs to be in two places so that everybody can understand what's happening and share information easily. Because you don't want to have a system where you get to the end of one workflow and you're like, okay, now I need to create a card for this other person, and I guess just link them, you know, so that if they think about it, they can follow the link back and like see what was on the other card or whatever. No, it's just you can see it all. You can see the status on every board that it's in. You can get the whole summary of all the information just by looking at it.
Yeah. Now it's with great power comes great responsibility.
That's right.
You know,
That's right, folks.
if you can do anything when it comes to these workflows, and you can have cards living in multiple places, which means you have to now, right? So you've got to you have the ability to build your own workflows and come up with the way that things work best for you, which is a bit of a challenge at first because and with so many other tools, other like work management tools, you just have to work in the framework that they have.
Yeah,
right?
you design your work around the tool, not design your tool around the work.
Yeah. So with Favro, you know, if you start using it, you know, the first thing you're going to have to do is really sit down and think, what do I want my life to be like? You know, how do I want my day to go? What do I want to see? What don't I want to see? And they also have a lot of really cool automations and stuff that you can use to have cards, you know, automatically get created or automatically move between different phases or different boards and stuff. So it's a great tool. We used it long before they sponsored the podcast, and we still use it to this day.
Yeah,
So,
which even our audio guy made a joke about because I think any longtime listener to podcast knows that we frequently change. We had until we got Favro frequently changed our work management software, so it's sticking around. It's a sticky one.
Yeah, I think before this, the longest one we stuck with was Trello for
probably a year.
But
Maybe
I
about
think
a year.
Still only about a year. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're just shattering records here. So again, there's a link over at favro.com/bscotch. Go there, check it out if you're looking for a way to, you know, beef up your productivity, your work life, or just, you know, make your life easier, increase work visibility, reduce stress. It's great. All right, now let's get on to some questions. These questions come from our listeners over at podcast.bscotch.net. The highest upvoted question comes from Doopaplie Pana, who says,
Good old Doopaplie.
yes, Doopaplie is a classic. Doopaplie says, pumpkin spice everything is back on the shelves. Spirit Halloween is taking over abandoned strip mall spaces. We are officially descending into spooky season.
Yes.
Any upcoming plans that may or may not include 12-foot tall skeletons?
Right. So that's a reference to the fact that Home Depot, I think starting last year, maybe 2 years ago, but I think it was last year, started selling this giant 12-foot tall, which like 12 seems like that seems big, but when you see it though, like at scale, you're like that's a lot bigger than
when you stand next. What?
Yeah, because something like 12 feet doesn't sound like that much taller than me, but it's literally twice as tall as I am.
This is how I feel whenever I see a picture of, you know, somebody like Shaquille O'Neal, who, what is he? He's like 7 feet tall or something, right? He's tall as fuck.
Really tall.
And then you see him next to, say, like Dwayne Johnson, who I believe is just over 6 feet.
He looks like a
Also
toddler.
a huge dude. Yeah.
Yeah, and like they're 1 foot apart. One of them looks like an actual baby next to the other. And I think part of it is the problem of like height is a linear measurement, right? Mm-hmm. But your volume of human, right, goes up cubed, right? So like somebody who is 7 feet tall is like twice the size of somebody who is 6 feet tall.
Yeah, they're just
in terms of like just how much person
is under their command.
Yeah. Because there's all these stories. I don't know if you guys have heard stories about Andre the Giant.
I mean, I haven't heard a lot of stories, but I've seen pictures of him like next to Arnold Schwarzenegger. You know, where it's again
that guy. So he had so many issues traveling. Like he would go. This is pretty gross, but it was a reality of what he had to do, which was when he went and stayed in hotels, he had to poop in the bathtub because he couldn't. In most hotels, the toilet would be in like a little like nook kind of, and he literally couldn't get there, and he would just poop in the bathtub and then just pay extra to the cleaning staff. Be like, I'm so sorry, because he just couldn't fit places. He couldn't fit on airplanes. He had to take like private flights to go anywhere because he was like mid 7 foot something, and he weighed like 600 pounds or something like that. And he would like, if they wanted to like go drinking, he would buy like 3 48 packs of beer and drink all of it. You would drink all of it in one evening and be kind of buzzed, you know? Like, this man was
trying to be a doctor for that guy and figure out dosaging stuff must have been fucking trip.
Like all the rules. I think it's the same thing as like when you're talking like neonatal and like baby physiology versus
the other
adults
side.
and stuff. Like there's a reason that they're pediatrics physicians, because like child biology is just not the same as adult biology, right? And like infant is even different again, and like it's just not the same. But also just for people once they're also all adults, a giant person, just like a huge person, is just not the same. They don't have like the same issues, right? Because like gravity suddenly is a much bigger problem than normally. It's like getting like the blood back from your legs, you know?
Yeah.
Is a much harder problem, but especially because like the body plan that we have, you know, is only works well for like the average height, basically, right? Once you start going like well beyond that, like the body plan doesn't hold up.
Freakish, what I heard was that like super tall dude who's in Ripley's or whatever. I can't remember how tall he is, like ridiculously tall. But basically, because the taller birds are, right? Yeah, it literally takes longer for you to feel things happening to your feet because they go all the way back up to your head, right? You don't have it's not in the middle where everything's meeting.
Yeah, and it's not going to be a lot longer, but like
it's apparently long enough. Like if you stub your toe, there's that moment. You know what I'm saying? There's a moment before the pain like really hits. And yeah, apparently people who are really tall very frequently have extra injuries on like the sort of shin and foot region because you just sort of you might do a couple things, get your foot around before you really get like the full signal that like, oh, I smacked my foot around, you know, because you're too damn long. It's crazy.
And just nothing is designed for your height, you know. So like you're just gonna be banging into more stuff. It's just how it works.
Yeah,
but giant skeletons. That's how.
Speaking of
target.
Halloween. Yeah.
So they had these 12-foot skeletons, and the moment I saw it, I was like, I don't care that it's expensive, but I have to have it. but it's been sold out though from the moment it came out. It's just been everybody wants it, so it's just been sold out. Period. I have an alert set up with like Home Depot to and I think I got it must have been out for 2 years. I think I got the alert last year, but it was still sold out everywhere I looked. Like the moment I got the alert, you know. So I don't get to have it, unfortunately, but that's what that was a reference to. But spooky season just is the best season. And my position on that is because it's the only one that doesn't take itself seriously. It's the only one that's about just having a good time
and being weird,
having fun, and also breaking convention, right? Because it's like, you're not supposed to be a certain thing. You're supposed to be like whatever the fuck you want, you know?
You're not supposed to purposely scare children.
Right, there is that. There's also you could just become a maniac, right? But I think that like when it comes to like self-expression and the ability to like just kind of do whatever you want, and just like be a person with your own interests and tastes, you know, like spooky season is the one that does that. It just like throws all the rules out the window, and I just love that.
That is true because Christmas has like
very strong opinions.
Yeah, it has strong opinions about like what you do. Like there's a Christmas dinner that you're supposed to have with
certain kinds of foods.
Yeah, Halloween, there's no family get together. There's no dinner. You just do whatever the fuck do you want to have a party? Have a party. Do you not want to have a party? Don't do that. Do you want to just hang out in your house and dress like a panda and give candy to random people that come up to your door? Do that.
Yeah, awesome. Yep.
Do you want to not do anything? That's viable.
Just turn your light off.
Just turn your light off. Just turn your light off. You could. It's the holiday that you can just fully opt out of. You know, without
and also whatever you want.
And also, you know, a lot of other holidays have opinions about what you're supposed to do with or for other people, right? It's like Valentine's is about the significant other. Christmas has this like gift giving component, you know. And Halloween is really like
it's just have a good time. That's its whole thing.
Yeah, nobody's demanding that you do anything for them on Halloween, and you can just if it's just not your year, you can just duck on out of there.
Yep.
No problem.
It's great.
Nobody's going to be weird about it.
Yeah, I don't have any big plans for the spooky season. We always talk about how October seems to have a certain amount of gravity in it, where like things just somehow always end up a lot of things happen sometime end of September into October typically. I don't know why, but for the past 5 or 6 years, this has largely held true for the studio, where just like it's the time when also just for some reason just things are happening, things are breaking. things are showing up that you didn't think were going to show up for a while.
And we've got
Sometimes
the-
it's good things, but it's always things that just like require a lot.
You got to deal with it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we have a lot of theories about how it's kind of the procrastination month because like everybody knows that November, December, it's just harder to get stuff done. It's the end of the year,
That's
it's
just
holiday seasons, you know, it's just chaos. But that's not really true of October. So it's kind of the last month of the year where you can kind of put things off until, you know, because you can plan to get some stuff done in October. You can't plan to get some stuff done in November, right? So
Well,
you
I
do.
think-
You
I
just
think a
put things
lot
off,
of-
and then suddenly it all comes
Yeah.
at you fast.
Yeah, I mean, so much of what happens to us in October's is basically like biz dev and broader industry related things. I think for exactly because we know at this point it's just like we're just old hat at the idea that all of our business partners, the moment November 1st hits, we can just basically say, okay, we'll talk to you, I guess, in like middle of January because the chances of us causing anything to happen, getting any responses, like it's just
Yeah. I mean, we've been like,
it's
we've
just
been like
zero.
probably 2 conversations away from closing a deal before in like, say December like 6th, I think is what it was. And then they were like, honestly, we'll just pick this up. We got some time, baby.
Yeah.
So we can have a couple.
Yeah, you know, especially our European business partners, those folks know how to vacation.
Yeah,
Man.
they do.
They do.
They
really do.
And I say this with respect and admiration. They know how to not work.
Yeah.
Like
Very true.
they're able to just be like, hey, bye. And then they're just gone for like 6 weeks. And then they come back and they're all refreshed. And like, anyway, where were we? And then they just pick up where they left off. And it's great, you know? And meanwhile, we're over here just hand wringing like, when's my email going to come back? in 6 weeks. That's the answer.
Yep, in 6 weeks. It has been
well, I'm
good
going-
for practicing just kind of like patience because like in the early days, I remember that being very stressful and anxiety inducing, just being like, not sure if and when they're going to get back to us and like not sure if the thing we're trying to make happen can happen. And I was just like, oh yeah, we'll just figure this out later, basically.
Yep.
Yeah.
It'll work out.
Yeah. With age comes patience, I guess.
Can.
Not everything is urgent, which seems weird because you would think that as you get older, you're like, I'm running out of time. Things need to happen faster. But no, as you get older, you're like, meh.
You're like, I'm having a good time. That's what
Yeah.
you do.
I'm here for a good time, not for a long time.
That's true. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to be going to India. I'll be in India on Halloween, which isn't really much of a thing in India. Instead, it's Diwali.
That's a good one too.
So
That's also about having a good time, isn't it?
it's just big old. It's the festival of lights. I think fireworks are kind of on the downswing because Indian cities are incredibly densely populated, and so fireworks are both dangerous and pollutive. You know,
Yeah.
is pollutive a word? I'm
be.
going with it.
It feels like it. Yes.
It feels like a word.
The question is, did you convey what you meant? And I mean, I got what you were saying. So
If so, then you
it's a
know,
word now.
yeet.
It has been anointed.
Let's go.
If so, yes.
Yeah. So I'll have plenty to say about that, but I'll be there for a couple weeks. So I'll be there over Diwali and then over kind of the Halloween. So
Also, to kick off kind of the entry into spooky season, you're doing the spooky coming up your mouth thing.
yeah, it's very spooky. It is happening just a couple hours after we record this podcast.
You're really leaning into the spook factor.
Yeah, I'll talk about. Yeah, let's do a little medical aside here. So I brush my teeth religiously, as in like I believe that there's a ghost in my toothbrush, and I pray when I do it. You know,
You have to
it's
lock
very
it in.
ritualistic. Yep. And I've always been pretty aggressive about tooth health, primarily because when I was growing up, I had just a huge number of orthodontic things for like 10 years running.
In a very complicated teeth scenario.
Yeah. And so it's like, you know, I went through all of it, and I know there's a sunk cost situation here, right? But it's like I went through all that, and I definitely don't want to have that go to waste. You know, I don't want to have had braces for like 5 years and all this other shit to then just lose a tooth because I didn't brush it. You know, what a bummer that would be, right?
Keep them pearly.
Yeah. So it turns out that, you know, there are good and bad ways to brush your teeth, and you can also do it too hard or too frequently or both. And I think that's the camp that I'm in.
Or use a brush that has anything besides soft bristles.
Yeah. So it's kind of like, hey, if you don't brush your teeth, you're in trouble. But also, if you do brush your teeth too much, you're also in trouble. Like all things in life, there's a balance. And so turns out that my brushing has caused gum recession on a couple of my teeth to the point where it's a problem. So and this is kind of interesting. So the way that your gums work is there's these two kinds of tissue. One is called keratinized tissue, which is like what's on the roof of your mouth. You know how like the roof of your mouth feels really hard, right? And it's because it's just like bone up there. And then the tissue that's on the roof of your mouth is just like stuck to the bone. It's just stuck on there. It's keratinized. So that's the same kind of tissue that is on your gums, like right around where your teeth are.
Sticks the gum to the tooth.
Yeah,
basically.
It's like sticking the gums on there. And then if you kind of look at your gums like below that like firm tissue, it's soft, right? And it's not like firmly attached. And that's kind of like where it feels like kind of like your cheek stuff starts, right? It's like kind of soft and squishy. It's not like hard like a bone. So what it can end up happening is if your gums recede far enough that you no longer have a border of keratinized tissue like above the soft tissue or like between like blocking the soft tissue, then suddenly stuff can just start slipping in like between the root of your tooth and the soft tissue. There's no like seal stuck on there. There's no seal.
It's like you get that like tarp, like a yard tarp thing that you put a garden bed. Contain it, and then you break a hole in the tarp, and now you just got stuff passing straight through.
Yes. So you brush too hard for too long, you can break the seal. So now what you got to do is you have to have a soft tissue graft where they go to the roof of your mouth, which has the same kind of tissue as the gums right around your like where your teeth attach, right? It's that keratinized tissue. They go to the roof of your mouth, they cut some of that off, and then they transplant it over to where your gums have receded. Right. So that's what I'm doing today. Like within a few hours. Apparently it sucks to have a cut in the roof of your mouth and around some of your teeth. The healing process is going to be a bit of a bummer, but it's, things heal pretty fast there. So their problem is just like eating and talking. Yeah. So I'll be going through that. But one of the things that you can do, if you have too much gum recession, that like taking tissue from the roof of your mouth would be a bad idea, right? Because you just don't have enough. Is they will take, cadaver tissue. So
very spooky. That's like
which I have a problem with this framing because it's like, all right, let's say somebody dies in a motorcycle accident and they're an organ donor, right? And they'll transplant that liver to somebody.
Yeah, you call it a donor liver.
You call it a donor liver. You don't say like, do you want a cadaver liver?
Because like cadaver is like dead for a while. That's what that's what it feels like,
Yeah.
And maybe that's true. Maybe that is where that specifically comes from, but we don't have to.
Can we not
specific?
Can we just call it a donor? Yeah. And so the cadaver gum transplant thing, it has a lower success chance because there's a possibility that it doesn't really like heal as well, or there's a rejection possibility, and all of that. But yeah, mostly I just had a problem with the framing of it because on the one hand, and also just the idea that like, if somebody were to transplant somebody else's kidney into my body, that's cool because it's just in there, and I'm not really I'm not interacting with it in a meaningful way.
Aren't rubbing your tongue on it. You know what I mean?
And I'm not putting my tongue on it, which something about having someone else's gums just in your mouth, and just sort of like that to me, that's a plan B. Like that's I'll do that if I have to, but that's definitely not going to be my first move. So, so I'm going through that. That's going to be, like you said, it's going to be a little bit spooky. So,
spooky.
Yeah. Now let's hit one last quick question.
Okay.
Sam's looking real skeptical because I said quick.
Quick is a great question.
But I want to hit two just because, Okay. All right. So the next and last question comes from Mimmabip Gourkee, who says, what's the checklist that you go through in your mind when you want to add a new enemy?
Speaking of checklists.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So enemy meaning like, you've got some kind of oppositional force in your game that's trying to like stop the player from doing stuff or harm the player or whatever.
Yeah.
So like, what are some things that you might like consider?
It'll depend on, game context. Like, what is the game?
It depends on a lot of things, but I think
infinite things.
In general, you want to think about enemy cast as a cast, as like a whole crew who has both sort of a thematic thing going on, but then also on an individual level, each person on that crew is supposed to be doing something, a little different, so that you're not just interacting with the same person over and over again, right? So what we've done in the past, typically when we're doing, say, creature development or whatever else, is a combination of looking at, where this thing's going to show up contextually or levels, whatever else. So what's around it, what's already happening, and specifically what mechanics are being taught or pulled on at that moment. If we have like really free reign on it, then really it's just a different question entirely, which is experientially, what can we do, heal interesting and different, or engage some kind of system or mechanic that we haven't really touched within like an enemy realm before. So that can be something, as seemingly simple as like this enemy pulls things, attacks them, right? Things that kind of change the nature of how you would have to react to it, where it's not just this enemy is the same, but hits harder. I mean, that's just kind of boring. At some point, you'll get there where you're like, you can't do more because you kind of got to, this is the lava version of this.
Yeah.
It's the same, but it hits for fire.
You don't necessarily want to, because you don't want to overload. Like you don't want to just keep adding more and more and more mechanics necessarily, because at a certain point, things just get overwhelming, right? Yeah. But
yeah. So I think we try to dig into them like that experiential list and say, like, can you, from a checklist perspective, does this meaningfully engage with an experience that we want the player to be having at this point, yet have supported? Then does it leverage existing mechanics? And again, this depends on where you're at in dev, because sometimes early dev, it's kind of wild because you could do almost anything. But especially in mid to late dev, you really want to be leveraging existing. Like, hey, can we put another whole entire feature in? And so you typically want to just ask, like, how can we use something that already exists in a slightly different way to get that? It's like, those are kind of the big ones. Variety, I think.
Yeah, it's less of a checklist than it is basically just the questions to ask, right?
Yeah.
And the specific questions just depend so much on your context, but they do come down to like, what is this for? That's the core question, right? What is because just the existence of an enemy is like, seems like, oh, now you've got a game, right? Like you got an enemy, fight it, right? But it just isn't that simple. It's what is it for more specifically? Not just a thing to fight. What is it for? Right. So that's I think the top most like the biggest, most important question that, as Sam said, there's just a long list of like, how does that fit into your context, right? And
yeah.
Like your dev context, different ways of looking at it.
Yeah. And I think another kind of cool thing to think about is sort of what does the player know and what don't they know? When they first encounter this enemy, and are there things that once the player learns them will make this enemy more interesting, right? Because you want it to be the case that when the player first encounters something, they can, based on what you've shown them so far, they can intuit how to deal with this new thing, right? And then I think like one of the really fun ones that I like is in Levelhead, where we have the scrubs and the ocula, which are the little enemies that just walk around, and when you stomp them, they kind of like retract into their body, and then you can throw them around like a turtle shell in Mario, right? But there's a couple of extra interactions with that, which is like when you stomp on them, you just see like, oh, they're like gone now, right? They're no longer a problem, and so you can just kind of defeat them. You can intuit that, and you can move on, right? Then once you get a handle on grappling and throwing, then picking up and throwing those shells or those bodies of those things becomes a new mechanic that you can use to fight other enemies, right? But then later on, once you learn more about how to grapple and throw and bounce off of things, in sort of like as you're navigating, then you can start to use those as
Traversal,
really weird traversal things, right? And so it's this enemy that kind of like starts out understandable and simple, but then opens up over time as the player discovers more of their toolkit and then that enemy becomes like a really cool staple of how the player navigates the world, right?
Yeah, because it's a richness in interactivity, right? Because even all those things are describing, like the core enemy design and behavior stays the same and dead simple. Just like walks around, you jump on it, turns into a shell, and then the shell can be thrown and then just behaves in a certain way, right?
Yep.
But because it doesn't just die, right? And because you can bounce off of it. So everything becomes about interactivity, so that if you take the whole context of like the game into account, so like in Levelhead, the game is about traversal. It's about moving, right? And dealing with what it means to move through space to get to certain places given chaos, right? And so like an enemy in that context needs to somehow impact traversal because
That's what's
otherwise
interesting. That's what the
that's
player's
what's
trying to
interesting.
do.
That's what it's for. Yeah. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So that's always a good thing to think about is like not just what does this enemy do sort of in the moment, because that actually can be very simple, but just then do we have more things in the game that if the player continues to encounter this enemy over time, that enemy stays interesting or becomes even more interesting? Because what you don't want necessarily is an enemy that like starts out basic and then just gets progressively less interesting and easier to defeat. And, which is always kind of a problem in RPG style games where your player, like your stats get bigger and bigger and you just, this is
Yeah, because it's not based on mechanisms of interaction. It's based off of like just details of numbers between.
Yeah. So like as soon as you can just kind of like one shot enemies, then they do become less interesting. This is kind of a problem that we're working through with Crashlands 2 because we believe that was an issue in original Crashlands of like once you can just one shot every Wompit, then Wompits aren't really a thing that provide any interesting gameplay. You just kind of go out and whack them, right? So there's a lot of kind of nuances to it. But all right, well that's all the time we have for this week. We'd like to thank our producers Fat Bard and Sampa DeCoster for putting the podcast together, and thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, you can just go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we have links to the Discord, a way for you to donate, and links to the archives. And we'd also like to thank Favro for sponsoring today's episode, and you can visit favro.com/bscotch to check them out. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Goodbye.